So we are jumping into chapter 33. And so we know last time in chapter 32, we saw that Jacob ended up wrestling with God, changed his name to Israel. He has a limp now. Some different things are going on. And so we know now he is supposed to be going on to meet his brother Esau and head back to where God had told him to go, to Bethel, right? And so we see that there's a shift in who Jacob is and how he acts. In the last chapter, we saw that he was afraid, and so he sent everybody before him. He was last. He's like, maybe they'll spare them. Maybe by the time they get to me, I won't have to worry. But now we see a different side of Jacob. We see in verse 3, it says, then Jacob went over. He left everybody behind, and he went first to go towards Esau. And so we see that there has been a shift. The shift because he's had this encounter with God. He's not afraid anymore. He knows who God said he is. He is acting differently. And I think that's such a great reminder for us, is that when we have these encounters with God, they change us. They change us forever. Hopefully for the better. Hopefully we don't grow bitter or something like that, but instead we are going after and we have boldness like Jacob did. And so we see that he now goes first. This is a shift because of what he has experienced with God. And he goes out, and Esau, it says, I love this in verse 4, it says Esau ran to meet him. It wasn't running after him. And I can imagine Jacob being, he's bold. Now he's going out there first, but now his brother is running towards him. I'm sure he's having panic, but he's just like, hey, God said it was going to be okay. I have to trust God. And it says that Esau ran to meet him, and he fell on his neck, and they embraced and kissed him. It means that he came lovingly. He was not angry. I love this picture because we see that Esau had to have worked through his own bitterness as well. I mean, this situation was not a great situation. He had already forgiven him in essence and wanted to make it right. He was excited to see his brother. And so we see this picture. They're getting to know each other. And then we see what Jacob does is he tries to give these gifts to Esau, because Esau said, what do you mean by all this? You sent all these gifts. Why are you doing this? I have my own. I'm good. And what I love about that is Esau was not the promised heir, but still he was blessed because he was a part of that family. And I love that God never leaves anyone out. He has the specific promise for us all, but the people that we touch are blessed because we are blessed and because we are living according to God's will. And so sometimes I think about how people say we're Jesus with skin on, or, we're the different things like that. We hear those sayings, but you really think about it, that we are sometimes the only thing that other people see. And so I love in verse 10, Esau is saying, I don't need that. And Jacob says, no, for truly to see your face, it is to me as if I had seen the face of God, and you have received me favorably. Now, it's not that Esau had some special face or something like this, but what it meant to him is that he could see that God had to have restored, because otherwise Esau would be angry. Esau would be bitter and horrible. But instead he saw this face of a forgiving brother. And so in that he said, I'm so in awe that God did this miracle in our lives. And then he urges Esau to take his gift again. And this is important because at the time, to show true forgiveness and true reconciliation had happened between two parties, there had to be a gift that was given and received. If it was refused, it meant that the forgiveness was not full. But once it was received, if someone said, yes, I will take it, then it means that they have officially, they're stating that they are forgiving him. And so we see he urges him because he wants this public showing. He wants to show everyone, yes, we already see in the heart it has changed, but publicly we want to show this has been forgiven. And so finally Esau accepts, and the gift is accepted. And I think that's a great sign of forgiveness, to show the world, like, not only have we forgiven each other, but we're showing the world that there has been reconciliation. And so I love that. And then we go on to see that he says, no, I'll catch up with you. We're going to take our time. Now, this is where it's interesting, because we know that God said his name was now Israel. But yet in this story, the writer is still referring to him as Jacob. And I think that it's interesting. He refers to Jacob as his name, Jacob, and not Israel, every time Jacob acts like his old self. And guess what he's doing? Acting like his old self. God had told him, return to Bethel, right? He said, return to that first place. And that was Bethel. And we see here, Esau takes off to head home thinking that Jacob's going to follow him. And instead, Jacob goes the other direction and sets up house in a place that is not where God told him to be. And it even says that he built himself a house. And if we remember, God said that you would dwell in tents and be a sojourner. And so he wasn't supposed to set up permanent dwelling unless God told him to. And so we see he's now in disobedience. Now, he's not doing anything terrible. He's not anything. And how many times are we there? We might not be totally doing terrible things. We're just not in obedience. And so we see him here. He sets up in this town where he's not supposed to be. But in verse 20, it's interesting that it says, there he erected an altar and called it El Eloi Israel, God of Israel. So he's setting up this altar, and it makes me think of the story later on in the Bible with Saul when he doesn't quite obey God. And he says, oh, but we did it as a sacrifice. And Samuel says to him, it is better to obey than sacrifice. And so that's 1 Samuel 15:22. And it's reminding me of this. We see him here. He's setting up this altar and saying, let's praise God. But God is saying, I'd rather you obeyed than sacrificed to me. And so today I want to urge you, what is it that God's telling you to obey? Are you obeying fully or partially? Because God still wants us to obey fully. And so I encourage you today, let's obey. Let's not sacrifice, but maybe let's obey and sacrifice. That would be the best way to go forward. So let's learn from Jacob not to return to our old ways of thinking, our old ways of going, and not full obedience, but let's choose to obey today. Join us next week as we jump into chapter 34.